I am Arthur, 32 years old. 8 months ago, my own father-in-law slapped me so hard across the face that my head actually bounced off the drywall of my own living room, leaving a dent in the plaster and a ringing in my ears that lasted for 3 days. While I was desperately trying to protect the emergency medical money for my premature infant twins, my wife's family stood over me like a pack of vultures. They called me a worthless parasite. My brother-in-law, Julian, even leaned down and spat right on my cheek. They laughed at me. They humiliated me in my own home, thinking they had completely broken my spirit, thinking they could strip my house bare and leave me with absolutely nothing while my wife was thousands of miles away serving in a combat zone. But there was one massive, catastrophic detail they did not know. They thought I was just a pathetic, stay-at-home dad living off their daughter's military salary. They thought I was a leech. They had absolutely no idea about the true nature of my career, my actual net worth, or the airtight legal trap my lawyer and I had already set to destroy them. And right at that exact, terrifying moment, they had no idea that the front door was about to swing wide open. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I brought an entire arrogant, toxic family to their knees, please hit that like button if you believe in true, unapologetic justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments section below. Your support means everything to me and helps me share this journey. Now, let's go back to the exact second where this nightmare reached its breaking point. My ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine. The metallic, sharp taste of blood instantly filled my mouth, pooling under my tongue. I slid slowly down the wall, my back scraping against the paint, my hands desperately clutching the torn, heavy envelope of cash to my chest. Above me, my father-in-law, Richard, stood with his chest puffed out, breathing heavily through his nose. Richard was a man who prided himself on his local real estate investments and his country club memberships. He was always wearing a tailored suit, always smelling like expensive cigars, and always looking down on anyone who did not match his tax bracket or his outdated idea of what a real man should be. Beside him, my mother-in-law, Martha, let out a sharp, mocking laugh. It was a sound I had heard at Thanksgiving dinners and family gatherings for years, usually directed at a waitress or a neighbor she deemed beneath her. But today it was directed at me. And then there was Julian, my wife's younger brother, the undisputed, untouchable golden child of the family. Julian was 28 years old, chronically unemployed by choice, and currently wiping his mouth with the back of his hand after spitting directly onto my face. "You really thought you could hide this money from us?" Richard snarled, his face turning a deep, angry shade of purple. He took a step closer, the leather of his expensive Italian shoes squeaking against my hardwood floor. "You freeloading piece of trash. You trapped my beautiful daughter. You adopted these defective, broken kids just to lock her down. And now you are stealing her hard-earned salary while she is overseas risking her actual life." The word defective hit me harder than his hand did. He was talking about my sons, my beautiful, fragile, premature twin boys, Leo and Max, who were currently sleeping in the nursery down the hall, completely dependent on the medical equipment I had purchased to keep their tiny lungs functioning. Richard reached down with violent speed and yanked the envelope from my grip. My fingers burned with the harsh friction of the thick paper tearing away from my skin. The thick stack of $100 bills spilled out slightly, the green paper mocking my helplessness. That was not Elena's military pay. That was not her salary. That was cash I had literally just withdrawn from a private vault to pay for an emergency specialist visit for the twins because my credit cards had been illegally frozen. "Give that back to me," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I was desperately trying to control. I tasted more blood as I spoke. "The boys need that money. It is strictly for their medical care. Without that money, the specialist will not perform the respiratory treatment." "Oh, just shut up, Arthur," Julian sneered, stepping forward and kicking the toe of my shoe hard. "Elena's money belongs to her real family. You are just a temporary mistake. A phase. Mom, grab the rest of the stuff from the nursery. Get the baby monitors, those expensive air purifiers, whatever you can carry. We are selling it all to recoup our losses." I watched in pure horror as Martha turned toward the hallway, her designer handbag swinging on her shoulder, heading straight for the room where my fragile sons were sleeping. My vision went entirely red. The edges of my sight blurred with pure adrenaline. I planted my hands firmly on the cold floor to push myself up. I did not care that Richard was bigger than me. I did not care that Julian was younger and faster. I was ready to physically fight my wife's entire family to the death to protect my children. I braced my legs, ready to launch myself at Martha's back. But I never had to throw a single punch. The heavy oak front door of our house, the one I had just locked 10 minutes prior, suddenly slammed open with enough explosive force to rattle the glass in the window panes. The brass handle smashed into the entryway wall, cracking the plaster. The three of them froze instantly. Martha stopped dead in her tracks, her hand hovering over the hallway light switch. Julian stumbled backward, his arrogant smirk vanishing. Richard whipped his head around, dropping the torn envelope of cash to the floor. I turned my head, my cheek still stinging, the spit still wet on my skin. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon porch light, was my wife, Captain Elena. She was supposed to be deployed in a highly dangerous combat zone for another 4 entire months. But she was here. She was standing in our home in full, dusty combat uniform, her heavy tactical boots planted firmly on the hardwood floor. Her gear was still strapped to her chest. Behind her stood 2 massive, stone-faced military police officers, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. The look on Elena's face was not shock. It was not confusion. It was pure, unadulterated, terrifying executioner's wrath. It was the look of a commanding officer who had just found enemy combatants torturing a hostage. How did we get to this point? How did a family that smiled for the cameras and hugged me at our wedding turn into a pack of wild, greedy dogs the absolute second my wife boarded a transport plane? To understand the sheer, magnificent satisfaction of their ultimate downfall, you have to understand the absolute, suffocating hell they put me through first. I thought the worst part of my life was saying goodbye to Elena at the base. I was so incredibly wrong. Elena and I met 4 years ago in a coffee shop near the military base. She was fierce, independent, incredibly disciplined, and deeply dedicated to her military career. I was a freelance software engineer, wearing a faded hoodie and staring at lines of code on my laptop. We were complete opposites, but we clicked instantly. Because I worked from home in sweatpants, kept a low profile, and drove a 5-year-old sedan, her parents immediately assumed I was a deadbeat. Richard was the kind of man who measured a person's absolute worth by the size of their corner office, the brand of their watch, and the prestige of their job title. When I told him I worked with computers from home, he wrote me off entirely. I never bothered to correct them. I am a deeply private person. I did not feel the need to broadcast to my judgmental in-laws that my boutique cybersecurity software company had recently been acquired by a major tech firm. I did not mention that I retained a highly lucrative, exclusive consulting contract that paid me more in a single month than Richard made in an entire year from his rental properties. Elena knew the truth, of course. She loved that I had the financial freedom and the daily flexibility to run the household. It allowed her to focus entirely on her demanding service without worrying about the electric bill or who was mowing the lawn. Our joy reached its absolute peak when we adopted our twin boys, Leo and Max. The adoption process was long, grueling, and filled with endless paperwork, background checks, and home visits. They were born severely premature and needed intensive, round-the-clock care in the NICU for the first 2 months of their lives. Bringing them home was exhausting, terrifying, and without a doubt, the greatest thing I had ever done in my entire life. To secure their future, I immediately contacted my wealth manager and set up a massive, ironclad college fund and an inheritance trust for them before they even left the hospital. Everything was perfect. We had built a quiet, safe, beautiful life. Then came the deployment orders. Elena was abruptly sent out on a highly sensitive, 8-month combat tour overseas. Our tearful goodbye at the military base is forever burned into my memory. She held me incredibly tight, kissed the boys' tiny foreheads, and made her parents promise to look out for us. Richard nodded solemnly, shaking my hand and patting Elena's shoulder. Martha cried theatrical tears, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and swore to her daughter that she would be at our house every single day to support me. The exact moment Elena's transport plane was in the air, the masks fell off entirely, started subtly, creeping in like a slow poison. 2 days after Elena left, Martha let herself into the house using the spare key we had stupidly given her for absolute emergencies. I was in the kitchen, exhausted, meticulously sterilizing bottles in boiling water. She walked past me without saying a single word of greeting, went straight into my home office, and started opening the drawers of my desk. When I wiped my hands on a towel, walked in, and politely asked her what she was doing, she looked at me like I was a cockroach she had found in her pantry. "I am organizing my daughter's finances," Martha stated coldly, not even making eye contact as she flipped through a stack of mail. "Since she is the only one bringing in a real salary, someone responsible needs to make sure you are not bleeding her dry. You know how much babies cost. I will not let you bankrupt my daughter while she is fighting for this country." I took a deep breath and tried to keep the peace. I told myself she was just an anxious mother coping poorly with her daughter being deployed in a dangerous war zone. I politely but firmly asked her to leave my desk alone, explaining that I had everything under control. She scoffed loudly, grabbed a stack of our utility bills, and walked out of the front door without another word. I should have called a locksmith and changed the locks right then and there. I should have set a hard boundary. But I did not want to cause family drama that would inevitably make its way back to Elena. In the military, emotional distraction can be deadly. If Elena was worried about a war at home, she might lose focus in the field. I vowed to handle it myself. I would absorb the abuse to keep her safe. By month 2, the psychological warfare escalated dramatically. I had to take the twins to the pediatrician constantly for weight checks and breathing treatments. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I came home exhausted, carrying 2 heavy car seats, to find Richard sitting in my living room. He had brought his friend David, the local bank manager who handled the branch where Elena and I kept our joint checking account. They were sitting on my couch, casually drinking my expensive scotch as if they owned the place. Richard looked at me with pure, unmasked disdain. "Arthur, David and I were just discussing Elena's accounts. It seems there have been some unusually high charges at the pharmacy and the specialty grocery store over the last few weeks. Are you funding a lavish lifestyle on my daughter's dime?" "I am buying specialized premature infant formula and prescription respiratory medication," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "Which you would know if you ever bothered to call and ask about the health of your grandsons." "Those aren't my grandsons," Richard fired back instantly, his face twisting in genuine disgust. "They are charity cases you dragged into my daughter's life to guilt her into staying with you. I am putting a stop to this nonsense today. David is going to freeze the joint credit cards until Elena returns. You will have to get a real job to pay for your little projects." I stared directly at David. He looked slightly uncomfortable, shifting his weight on my couch, but he nodded along with Richard. I knew the law. I knew it was entirely illegal for David to restrict my access to my own joint accounts without a direct court order or Elena's signature. Richard wielded a lot of influence in our local town's business circles, and David was clearly bending the rules to appease a wealthy client. I could have easily called my lawyer right then, drafted a massive lawsuit, and buried David and his bank in federal financial compliance violations. But again, I held back. I did not want to trigger a massive legal battle that would inevitably drag Elena's name into the public record while she was deployed. I simply pulled out a different card from my wallet, my personal, high-limit black card tied to my corporate accounts, and paid for everything the boys needed moving forward. I truly thought I could just weather the storm in silence. I thought keeping my head down, ignoring their insults, and focusing entirely on keeping the boys healthy was the mature, responsible thing to do. But predators do not respect boundaries. They do not respect silence. They only respect power. And because I was hiding my power, they thought I was incredibly weak. The betrayal ran much deeper than just my in-laws. We had a neighbor, Mrs. Higgins. She was a sweet-looking, elderly woman who always brought over baked goods and attended the local HOA meetings. I thought she was a friendly face in a lonely neighborhood. I did not realize she was Martha's personal, dedicated spy. Every single time I left the house to go to the pharmacy, the grocery store, or the doctor, Mrs. Higgins would peek through her blinds and immediately call Martha. Martha would then use her spare key to enter my home while I was gone, snooping through my closets, checking my computer history, looking for any excuse to build a case against me. She was actively looking for ammunition to force a divorce. She was acting like a vulture at a funeral, waiting for the body to drop. The situation was rapidly reaching a boiling point. The air in my own home felt toxic and heavy, but absolutely nothing could have prepared me for the morning Julian pulled into my driveway. The sheer audacity and criminal nature of what they had done behind my back was about to hit me like a runaway freight train. It was a bleak, overcast Tuesday morning. The twins had been up almost the entire night with mild fevers, a common but terrifying occurrence for premature babies. I was running on exactly 2 hours of broken sleep. I was standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at the wall while making a fresh pot of coffee, when I heard the unmistakable, aggressive roar of a high-performance engine tearing down our quiet suburban street. I walked over and looked out the front window. A brand-new, gleaming silver Porsche 911 was parked violently sideways across my driveway. The tires had completely crushed the delicate rose bushes Elena had spent her last weekend at home planting. The driver's door popped open, and Julian stepped out. He was wearing an expensive designer leather jacket, aviator sunglasses, and a smug, arrogant grin that made the blood in my veins run completely cold. Julian had never held a steady job for more than 3 consecutive months in his entire adult life. He had burned through a small, modest inheritance from his grandparents years ago on bad crypto investments and constantly begged Elena for money to cover his rent. Seeing him stepping out of a $100,000 luxury sports car made the hair on the back of my neck stand up immediately. Something was deeply, horribly, legally wrong. I opened the front door and walked out onto the porch, crossing my arms tightly over my chest to keep my hands from shaking. "Move the car, Julian. You are crushing Elena's roses." He laughed loudly, a grating sound, and leaned casually against the pristine hood of the Porsche. "Relax, Artie. I'll buy you a new bush. Actually, no, I won't. You can buy it with whatever pathetic scraps my sister leaves you when she finally realizes what a loser you are. What do you think of the new ride? Custom interior." "Where exactly did you get the money for a Porsche?" I asked flatly, my eyes scanning the temporary dealer tags. "Investment payout," he lied smoothly, not even blinking. "Dad helped me set it up with his real estate contacts. I'm moving up in the world, Artie. Speaking of which, Dad wants to see you at his office this afternoon. He said to tell you not to be late." Julian tossed his lit cigarette but directly onto my front lawn, got back into the sports car, revved the engine obnoxiously loud, and sped off, leaving a thick trail of exhaust fumes and ruined flowers in his wake. I did not go to Richard's office. I went straight back inside the house, locked the door, and immediately booted up my secure, multi-monitor workstation. I am a senior software engineer specializing in data security and financial encryption. Finding hidden information is literally what I built my career on. I logged into the joint banking accounts, the ones David the bank manager had supposedly frozen at Richard's request. I bypassed the standard, consumer-facing banking portal and ran a deep, diagnostic trace on the recent transaction histories using tools the bank's IT department wouldn't even understand. What I saw on the screen made my stomach drop so hard I felt physically sick. The primary joint checking account was untouched, but the secondary, highly secure emergency medical fund we had set up specifically for the twins, an account that was supposed to be completely restricted and require dual authorization, had been utterly drained. Almost $90,000 was gone, vanished. I tracked the digital footprint. The money had been wired out in 3 separate massive transactions over the last 4 weeks. The destination was an obscure LLC registered under Richard's name, specifically categorized as a real estate holding company. They had not just frozen my credit cards to control my grocery spending. They had somehow bypassed the security protocols, absolutely with David's corrupt help from inside the bank, and stolen the money meant to keep my fragile sons alive. And then, Richard had funneled that stolen medical money to Julian so he could buy a Porsche to stroke his own massive ego. The sheer, calculated evil of it paralyzed me for a long moment. I sat in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing numbers. They knew the twins needed an upcoming, highly specialized respiratory surgery. They knew that money was our safety net, and they took it to buy a luxury toy for their golden child. Suddenly, my cell phone buzzed on the desk. It was Claire, Elena's cousin. Claire had always played the sweet, innocent peacemaker in the family. She came over often, bringing cheap coffee, pretending to check on the boys, and offering a shoulder to cry on. I answered the phone, my voice completely tight. "Arthur, hey?" Claire said softly, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I heard about the credit cards being frozen. I am so sorry Uncle Richard is being so difficult right now. Listen, I know a way to get them off your back for good." "I am listening," I said evenly, my eyes still locked on the zero balance of the medical fund on my monitor. "Uncle Richard just wants to feel completely secure about Elena's assets while she is away. He is terrified of a nasty divorce or a custody issue if things go bad between you two. If you just sign over temporary power of attorney for the real estate property to him, he will back off. He will unfreeze the cards. He just wants his name on the deed to protect his daughter's investment. It is just a formality, Arthur. Please, just do it for the sake of the babies." I closed my eyes. The final puzzle piece clicked perfectly into place. Claire was not a peacemaker. She was the inside man. She was currently facing a massive, career-ending lawsuit over a failed retail business venture of her own, and she desperately needed cash. Richard was promising her a cut of the pie if she could convince the dumb, desperate, broke stay-at-home dad to sign away the deed to our $1 million suburban home. "I will think about it, Claire," I said coldly, and hung up the phone without waiting for her reply. I did not panic. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. A strange, icy, terrifying calm washed over my entire body. I picked up my phone and made 3 very specific calls. The first call was to my personal corporate lawyer, a shark of a man named Harrison. I instructed him to draft the most aggressive, scorched-earth legal complaints he had ever written in his 30-year career. I wanted civil suits for grand larceny, wire fraud, and emotional distress targeting Richard, Martha, Julian, David, and Claire. I wanted emergency custody safeguards put in place so they could never legally approach my children again. The second call was to Mr. Sterling, the billionaire CEO of the tech giant that had acquired my company. Sterling owed me his entire global cybersecurity infrastructure. I told him I needed a large amount of physical, untraceable cash delivered to my house, securely, and I needed my primary Black accounts fully activated for immediate, massive transfers to Harrison's legal trust. Sterling offered me a massive promotion and a board seat on the spot out of sheer respect for the coldness in my voice, but I declined. I just needed the money mobilized. The third call was the most important. It was to a private, high-level military contractor liaison I knew through Elena's command structure. I needed to get a highly encrypted, priority emergency message directly to my wife's commanding officer. I was no longer keeping the peace. I was bringing down the hammer of God. I spent the next 2 agonizing weeks setting the bait. I played the pathetic victim perfectly. I let Mrs. Higgins see me looking stressed, unshaven, and exhausted. I let Claire think I was seriously considering signing the house over to Richard. I made sure Richard and Martha thought I was completely broken, and completely out of options. And then I made my final move. I laid the trap that would end their reign of terror forever. But nothing in life goes perfectly according to plan, and the storm was about to violently hit my living room sooner than I ever expected. The tension inside the house over those 2 weeks was physically unbearable. Felt like walking through thick mud. Max, the smaller and more fragile of the twins, suddenly developed a severe, rattling respiratory infection. His breathing became shallow and fast. The pediatrician, Dr. Aris, a highly respected specialist in the city, informed me during an emergency visit that Max needed a highly specialized breathing treatment machine and a specific imported formula that our standard insurance absolutely refused to cover. I stood in Dr. Aris's sterile white clinic, holding Max tightly against my chest. Dr. Aris examined Max's chart, his face grim and tired. "Arthur, I know things are extremely tight financially with Elena away on deployment, but you need to get this medication and this machine today. His lungs are struggling to oxygenate his blood. We cannot wait." "I will get it," I promised, my voice unwavering. "Write the prescription. Money is not an issue." Dr. Aris hesitated, tapping his pen against the clipboard. He was an excellent doctor, but he played golf at the same country club as Richard. He knew the local gossip. He knew the family dynamics. "Arthur, Richard actually called the clinic yesterday. He demanded to know if you were racking up unnecessary, frivolous medical bills on Elena's tab. I had to tell him no due to patient confidentiality, but he made it sound like you were on the verge of bankruptcy. If you need help, do not worry about Richard ever again," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Just write the prescription, doctor." Leaving the clinic, I drove straight to the bank. I did not go to David's local branch where my in-laws banked. I drove to a high-tier, secure private banking institution downtown where my corporate wealth was managed. Mr. Sterling had arranged everything perfectly. I walked past the marble columns, was escorted immediately into a secure, soundproof vault area, and withdrew $20,000 in crisp, banded cash. I needed it immediately for the private medical supply company, which only dealt in wire transfers or certified physical funds for expedited emergency equipment, and I absolutely did not have time to wait for a standard wire to clear over the weekend. Max's life depended on it. I put the thick, heavy envelope of bills into the inside pocket of my jacket, feeling the weight of it against my ribs. I drove to the medical supplier, bought the specialized respiratory machine and the imported medication, drove home, and immediately administered the breathing treatment to Max. Within an hour, his color improved from a terrifying pale blue to a healthy pink. His breathing slowed. The boys finally, mercifully, fell into a deep, peaceful sleep in their cribs in the nursery. I walked into the kitchen, the adrenaline slowly leaving my system, and poured myself a tall glass of ice water. I leaned against the granite counter, rubbing my burning eyes. The physical exhaustion was bone deep, a heavy ache in my muscles, but my mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The legal documents were completely ready. Harrison had sent me the final drafts. The private investigators I hired had already compiled a massive, undeniable mountain of photographic and digital evidence against Richard's fraudulent LLC, Julian's car purchase, and David's illegal banking maneuvers. All I had to do was wait for Monday morning to formally file the lawsuit and destroy them financially and legally. Then the doorbell rang. It was not a polite, normal ring. It was frantic, aggressive, sustained pressing. Buzz, buzz. I looked at the high-definition security monitor mounted on the wall. It was Richard, Martha, and Julian. They looked absolutely furious, pacing on my porch. Mrs. Higgins, the loyal neighborhood spy, must have been watching through her curtains. She must have seen me carrying the large medical supply boxes and the bank envelope into the house and immediately called Martha to report that I somehow still had access to large amounts of money. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door. They didn't even wait for an invitation. They violently pushed past me immediately, storming into the hallway like a rogue SWAT team executing a raid. "Where is it?" Richard demanded loudly, his face red with exertion, his eyes scanning the living room wildly. "Keep your damn voice down," I warned him fiercely, pointing a strict finger toward the hallway. "The boys are finally asleep after a medical emergency. What the hell do you want?" "Do not play dumb with me, you little rat," Martha hissed, stepping up to me and poking my chest with her manicured finger. "Mrs. Higgins saw you counting a massive stack of cash in your car before you brought those boxes in. Where did you get it? Did you take out a secret, illegal loan against our daughter's house?" Did you steal from her retirement? That is absolutely none of your business, I said, standing my ground, refusing to back up a single inch. Julian stepped forward, loudly cracking his knuckles. He was trying to look like an intimidating tough guy, but in his designer clothes paid for by stolen money, he just looked like a spoiled child playing dress-up. Listen to me, you pathetic loser. That money belongs to this family. You are probably hiding it in a suitcase to run away before Elena gets back and divorces you. Hand the cash over right now. Or what, Julian? I challenged, staring directly into his cowardly eyes, my voice dead calm. You are going to take it from me? That money is for Max's medical treatment. You already stole the entire emergency fund to buy your stupid Porsche. You are not touching a single dime of this money. Richard's eyes widened slightly in shock at the mention of the Porsche. He did not realize I knew the exact paper trail. He thought he was a criminal mastermind, but his surprise quickly morphed into violent, uncontrollable anger. He realized he was losing control of the narrative. You disrespectful, ungrateful piece of garbage, Richard roared, losing all composure. He lunged forward. That was the exact moment he slapped me. The impact was blinding, a flash of white light behind my eyes. My head snapped to the side, hitting the drywall with a sickening thud. The envelope of cash slipped from my inside jacket pocket, falling to the floor and bursting open. Julian immediately dove for it, snatching up the $100 bills like a starving dog fighting for scraps. He stood up, hawked a loogie, spat directly on my cheek, and laughed. Martha stood beside him, her eyes gleaming with absolute, sickening greed as she looked at the thick stack of bills. This cash should cover the inconvenience of dealing with you? Richard sneered, looking down at me as I slid down the wall, clutching my bleeding face. Julian, Mom, grab the rest of the stuff from the nursery. We are done here. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally broken the pathetic stay-at-home dad. They were so utterly blinded by their own arrogance, greed, and sense of entitlement that they did not hear the heavy, armored tires of the military transport vehicle pulling up to the curb outside. They did not hear the heavy, synchronized boots marching up the concrete steps of my porch. As Martha eagerly took a step toward the hallway, ready to strip my children's nursery of anything valuable she could pawn, the front door violently slammed open, and there stood my wife, Captain Elena, flanked by military police, her eyes burning with a fury that could melt steel. The storm had officially arrived, and I knew with absolute certainty that there would be absolutely no survivors in her wake. The silence in my living room was so absolute, so heavy, it felt like all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the space. The heavy oak front door was still physically vibrating on its brass hinges from the sheer, explosive force of Elena's entrance. The pale, desert dust from her combat boots seemed to hang suspended in the afternoon sunlight pouring through the entryway. It was a movie scene playing out in real time, but the stakes were my life, my dignity, and the safety of my children. I was still sitting on the cold hardwood floor. My hand was pressed firmly against my bleeding cheek, the sharp, burning sting of Richard's slap radiating through my jawbone and down my neck. Julian, the golden boy, was frozen mid-laugh. His manicured hand was still tightly gripping the $20,000 in cash he had just scooped off the floor like a greedy animal. Martha was completely immobilized near the hallway. One of her expensive designer shoes was pointing toward the nursery where my fragile sons were sleeping, and her oversized leather handbag was slipping awkwardly off her shoulder. She looked like a thief caught in the beam of a police spotlight. And then there was Elena, my beautiful, fierce wife. She looked like an absolute, unstoppable force of nature. Her uniform was completely covered in the fine, pale dust of the combat zone she had just left. Her tactical vest was fully loaded, heavy with gear. But it was her eyes that truly terrified the room. They were completely devoid of any warmth or familial affection. She surveyed the chaotic scene in a fraction of a second. She saw her bleeding husband on the floor. She saw her lazy brother clutching a massive stack of cash. She saw her father standing over me with his fists still aggressively clenched. Elena, Richard finally gasped. His voice cracked like a dry winter branch. The arrogant, booming tone of the wealthy local real estate mogul was completely gone. Sweetheart, what on earth are you doing here? You are not supposed to be home until Thanksgiving. Elena did not answer him. She did not even look at his face. She took 3 heavy, deliberate steps into the room, bypassing her father entirely as if he were a ghost, and knelt right beside me. She reached out with a trembling, dust-covered hand and gently touched the unbroken side of my face. "Arthur," she whispered. Her voice cracked for just a split second, betraying the raw emotion underneath, before she forced it into a cold steel rod. "Are the boys safe? Are Leo and Max okay?" "They are sleeping," I rasped, wiping Julian's disgusting spit from my face with the back of my flannel sleeve. "Max had a severe respiratory crisis earlier today. I just gave him the emergency treatment. They are okay right now, but they need that money for the specialist." Elena's jaw tightened so hard I genuinely thought her teeth might shatter under the pressure. She stood up slowly, turning to face the people who shared her DNA. Behind her, the 2 massive military police officers, Sergeant Miller and Corporal Jenkins, stepped fully into our house. Jenkins immediately raised his heavy-duty, military-grade smartphone. The red recording light glared like a sniper's laser sight, pointed directly at Richard's chest. "Elena, you have to understand what you are seeing here," Richard started, his slimy survival instincts finally kicking into overdrive. He was a master manipulator, a man who had spent decades spinning narratives at country club dinners and HOA meetings to protect his inheritance and his flawless public image. He took a tentative step toward her, holding his hands up in a fake, placating gesture. "This man you married is a criminal. Mom and I came over to check on the boys because we were worried, and we caught Arthur trying to flee. He was stealing from your joint bank accounts." Look at Julian's hand. "Arthur was trying to stash $20,000 in physical cash to abandon your children and file for a nasty divorce while you were deployed overseas." It was a brilliant, disgusting, flawlessly delivered lie. It was exactly the kind of lie that would absolutely work on someone who did not know the truth, someone who had not been paying attention. But Elena knew everything. She knew the unfathomable depths of my loyalty, and thanks to the encrypted priority message I had sent to her commanding officer weeks ago, she knew exactly what her toxic family had been doing in the shadows for the last 8 months. "Put the money down, Julian," Elena commanded. Her voice was not a sisterly request. It was a direct, lethal military order. Julian swallowed hard. I could see his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his collar. He looked down at the thick stack of $100 bills in his hand, then looked up at the 2 military police officers glaring at him with pure contempt. He slowly, shakily bent down and placed the torn envelope of cash onto the glass coffee table, backing away immediately as if the money had suddenly caught fire and burned him. "Elena, please listen to your father," Martha chimed in, her voice shrill and desperate, vibrating with panic. She took a tentative step back from the hallway, realizing the nursery was no longer an option to raid. "Arthur is toxic. He is manipulative. We were just trying to protect your hard-earned assets. We were protecting your military salary. He has been buying ridiculous, lavish things while you are away risking your life. He has been keeping terrible secrets from you. The only people keeping secrets in this house are you," Elena fired back, her voice echoing loudly off the vaulted ceiling of our living room. "I know exactly what you did, Dad. I know all about the fraudulent real estate LLC you set up to drain the medical fund. I know about your little arrangement with the bank manager, David. I know you used the money meant to keep my premature babies breathing to buy Julian a luxury sports car." Richard's face drained of all color instantly. He looked exactly like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. How could you possibly know any of that? You have been in an active combat zone. He is lying to you, Elena. Arthur is a master manipulator. He is an unemployed, pathetic stay-at-home dad who does absolutely nothing but drain your resources. He is a leech. At that exact, perfect moment, The deep, rhythmic, thundering thud of heavy rotor blades filled the air outside. The sound was so incredibly loud the framed pictures on our walls literally rattled. A massive, sleek black corporate helicopter was descending onto the empty grassy lot at the end of our suburban street. Less than a minute later, a black luxury SUV with heavily tinted windows pulled aggressively into my driveway, parking directly behind Julian's shiny new silver Porsche, completely boxing it in. The front door of my house, still wide open to the neighborhood, admitted a tall, highly distinguished man in his late 60s. He was wearing a bespoke, charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Julian's entire car. He had silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and an aura of absolute, terrifying, billionaire authority. Two massive private security guards flanked him, scanning the room. It was Mr. Sterling, the CEO of the tech conglomerate that had purchased my software company. Richard gasped audibly. As a local real estate developer, Richard knew exactly who Sterling was. Everyone in the high-end financial world knew Sterling. Richard had spent years desperately trying to get a simple 15-minute meeting with Sterling's investment group to pitch a project, and he had been repeatedly, embarrassingly denied. "Mr. Sterling?" Richard stammered, completely ignoring the military police and stepping forward, automatically extending his hand like a trained dog. What an incredibly unexpected honor. "I am Richard. We have mutual associates in commercial real estate downtown. What brings a man of your stature to this neighborhood?" Sterling did not even look at Richard's outstretched hand. He looked down at the fresh blood on my face, then looked at Julian cowering near the kitchen, and finally looked at Elena. He gave her a deeply respectful, solemn nod. "Captain," Sterling said in his rich, gravelly voice, commanding the attention of everyone in the room, "thank you for your service to this country. I sincerely apologize for the dramatic entrance, but my head of global cybersecurity informed me he was dealing with a highly volatile, hostile domestic situation. I do not let my most valuable assets face threats alone." Sterling walked right past Richard as if the man were a piece of cheap, invisible furniture. He extended his hand down to me. I took it, and he pulled me up from the floor with surprising physical strength. "Arthur," Sterling said, clapping me firmly on the shoulder. "Are you all right? My legal team is waiting outside in the SUV right now. The transfer of the physical funds you requested is fully complete and secured." Richard looked like his brain was physically short-circuiting. His eyes darted frantically between me and the billionaire CEO. Wait a minute. Mr. Sterling, please, there must be some kind of massive misunderstanding here. You just called my son-in-law your most valuable asset. Arthur doesn't work. He plays with computers in the spare bedroom. He is broke." Sterling finally turned to look at Richard, and the absolute, unmasked disgust on his face was one of the most beautiful things I have ever witnessed. "You truly are an exceptionally ignorant, pathetic man," Sterling said coldly, his voice dripping with venom. "Arthur does not play with computers. Arthur is the original, sole architect of the proprietary encryption software that currently secures the financial data for 3 of the largest banks in the world. When my firm acquired his company 2 years ago for an 8-figure sum, he personally negotiated a contract that allows him to work exclusively from home so he could raise his children. His current monthly consulting salary alone makes him one of the wealthiest men in this entire zip code." Martha let out a sharp, choked gasp, clapping both of her hands tightly over her mouth. Her eyes were as wide as dinner plates. Julian looked like he was going to vomit right onto his expensive designer leather shoes. The realization was crashing down on their heads like a collapsing concrete building. But the credit cards," Richard stammered, his mind spinning as his entire constructed worldview violently shattered into a million pieces. "We froze Elena's accounts. He had no money. He had to beg. He never needed your daughter's money," Sterling countered smoothly, crossing his arms. "In fact, Arthur has been quietly paying the property taxes on your own house for the last 3 years because you were secretly drowning in bad debt. He also fully paid off Julian's massive underground gambling debts 2 years ago to keep his legs from being broken by local bookies. He did it quietly, through anonymous dummy accounts, because he didn't want to embarrass you in front of your daughter. He is a multimillionaire who chose to live humbly. And you, like absolute, arrogant fools, decided to violently poke a sleeping dragon. I stood tall, feeling the throbbing pain in my jaw fading entirely into pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I looked Richard dead in the eye. "I let you think I was weak," I said, my voice steady, cold, and final. "I let you insult me. I let you parade around my house like you owned it, because I promised Elena I would keep the peace while she was deployed. But you crossed the point of no return the exact second you stole the medical funds meant for my sons. You didn't just steal money, Richard. You tried to steal their health. And for that, I am going to destroy every single thing you have ever built." I thought the look of utter horror on their faces was the absolute peak of my satisfaction. I was wrong. The real legal nightmare for them was just beginning. The crushing, suffocating weight of the truth had completely paralyzed my in-laws. Martha was openly weeping now. These were not tears of genuine remorse or guilt for the pain she had caused. They were tears of absolute, selfish terror. She knew the endless gravy train had not just derailed. It had violently exploded into a million unrecoverable pieces. Julian was slowly backing away toward the kitchen island, frantically looking for a back exit like a trapped, cowardly rat. Richard, however, was a classic, textbook cornered narcissist. And cornered narcissists always double down on their delusions of grandeur. "This is ridiculous," Richard spat, desperately trying to regain his dominant, authoritative posture, though his hands were trembling so violently he could barely keep them at his sides. He aggressively pulled his expensive cell phone from the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket. "I don't care how much hidden money you have, Arthur. You still assaulted me. You have been legally hiding massive assets during a marriage. That is absolute grounds for a massive, ruinous lawsuit. I know the chief of police in this town personally. We golf every single Sunday. I am calling him right now, and I am having you arrested for battery, and we will see exactly how your fancy tech job handles a highly publicized domestic violence charge." He aggressively dialed the numbers, holding the phone to his ear with a triumphant, malicious glare directed right at my face. Elena did not even flinch. She did not break eye contact with her father. She just turned her head slightly to the side. "Sergeant Miller." "Ma'am," the massive military police officer responded, taking a heavy step forward, his boots thudding on the wood. "Please inform my father about the current jurisdictional status of this property." Miller smiled. It was not a nice, friendly smile. It was the terrifying smile of an apex predator cornering its prey. "Mr. Richard, under the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, and due to the explicit fact that Captain Elena here is an active duty officer who has formally requested federal protection against financial exploitation and domestic threats, this specific property is currently under the protective, exclusive jurisdiction of the United States Military Police. Your local golf buddy police chief has absolutely zero authority here." Richard's phone finally connected. I could hear the faint, tinny voice of the local dispatcher on the other end asking what his emergency was. Richard slowly lowered the phone from his ear, his finger hovering uncertainly over the end call button. His face went entirely slack. "Furthermore," Miller continued, his voice booming and echoing in the quiet room, "we have crystal clear, high-definition video evidence, recorded by Corporal Jenkins over the last 15 minutes, of you explicitly admitting to draining a protected medical account, as well as you physically striking a military dependent. That is a federal offense. We also have flawless audio of your son, Julian, spitting on the victim and attempting to physically flee the scene with $20,000 in stolen cash." No, wait," Julian shrieked in absolute panic, throwing his hands high in the air as if surrendering to an invisible firing squad. "I didn't steal anything. Dad gave me the money for the car. I didn't know it was from the baby's medical fund. I swear to God, Elena, I didn't know anything about it." He threw his own father under the speeding bus without a single second of hesitation. That was the profound level of loyalty Richard had bred in his golden child. "It doesn't matter who pulled the trigger," Elena said coldly. She unzipped a pouch on her tactical vest, pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder, and tossed it onto the glass coffee table right next to the stack of cash. It landed with a heavy smack. Arthur's private investigators have been working overtime while I was flying back. I received this digital file securely 3 days ago. It details exactly how you and David, your corrupt bank manager friend, illegally bypassed the dual signature requirement on the twins' medical trust. It outlines every single wire transfer. It details the fraudulent LLC you created to hide the theft. I stepped forward, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a formal, heavily stamped legal document drafted by my lawyer, Harrison. This, I said, holding the paper up so Richard could clearly read the bold heading, is a federal freeze order. As of 20 minutes ago, when Mr. Sterling's legal team filed the emergency motions with a federal judge, every single bank account associated with you, Richard, has been completely frozen. Your personal checking accounts, your business accounts, your retirement 401k, your investment portfolios. Everything is locked tighter than a drum pending a massive federal investigation for wire fraud and grand larceny. Martha let out a harrowing wail that sounded exactly like a dying animal in the woods. Our house. Richard, what about the mortgage? What about the country club fees? What about my credit cards? She turned back to Elena, literally dropping to her knees on the hardwood floor, desperately clutching the fabric of her daughter's combat trousers. Elena, please. We are your family. We raised you. You cannot let him do this to us. We will give the money back. We will sell the car. We will do whatever you want. Elena looked down at her weeping mother with eyes that held absolutely zero pity. There was a time when Elena would have rushed to comfort her, but that woman died the day her parents stole from her children. You stopped being my family the exact second you endangered my children's lives for money, Elena said, her voice shaking slightly with suppressed rage. You stopped being my mother the second you watched my husband bleed on the floor of his own home and laughed in his face. Elena smoothly pulled her leg back, breaking her mother's desperate grip. Jenkins, call the local FBI field office. General Vance has already fully briefed their director on the situation. Have them send a transport van. We have 3 suspects ready for federal processing. Understood, Captain, Jenkins said, immediately tapping his shoulder radio. Pure, unadulterated panic completely overtook Julian. He bolted. He shoved past his kneeling mother, practically climbing over the back of the sofa, and sprinted blindly for the open front door. He genuinely thought he could just get into his shiny new Porsche, start the engine, and drive away from the catastrophic consequences of his miserable life. He made it exactly 3 feet out the door. He slammed directly into the solid, wall-like chest of one of Mr. Sterling's private security guards. The guard effortlessly grabbed Julian by the collar of his expensive designer jacket and tossed him back onto the wooden porch like a sack of garbage. At the exact same time, a heavy, flatbed tow truck pulled up to the curb, its yellow warning lights flashing brightly, casting shadows across our lawn. A man in a high-visibility vest hopped out, completely ignoring the drama on the porch, and immediately started hooking heavy steel chains to the front axle of Julian's gleaming silver Porsche 911. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Julian shrieked from the porch, scrambling to his feet with scraped palms. That is my car. You can't take that. I have the title. I walked out onto the porch, standing calmly next to the massive security guard. The quiet suburban neighborhood was starting to wake up. Front doors were opening. People were stepping out onto their manicured lawns in their robes. I clearly saw Mrs. Higgins standing on her pristine front walkway, her jaw hanging wide open in shock as she watched the utter chaos unfold at the house she had been spying on. You don't have the title, Julian? I said loudly, projecting my voice so the entire neighborhood could hear the absolute truth. You bought that luxury car using stolen medical funds, which means the car was purchased with the direct proceeds of a federal crime. My legal team filed a hard lien against it this morning. That Porsche is being impounded right now as federal evidence. You are going to be walking for a very, very long time. Julian fell to his knees on the cold concrete of the porch, burying his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably like a toddler as the tow truck mercilessly ripped his ultimate status symbol away from the curb and drove off down the street. Inside the house, Richard was completely defeated. The fight had completely left his body. He slumped heavily onto my sofa, staring blankly at the floor. He looked 20 years older. The arrogant real estate mogul was dead. In his place sat a broken, pathetic old man who had finally, agonizingly realized that his massive ego had just cost him everything he had ever valued in his entire life. The wail of police sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The federal agents were arriving. I turned back into the house, firmly closing the door on the public spectacle outside. Elena was standing alone in the center of the living room. She slowly unbuckled her heavy tactical vest, letting it drop to the floor with a heavy thud. She looked exhausted, completely drained, but the fierce fire in her eyes was slowly being replaced by the gentle, familiar warmth I had missed for 8 excruciating months. She walked over to me, ignoring her broken parents completely. She wrapped her arms tightly around my neck and buried her face deep in my shoulder. I held her, feeling the solid, real weight of her against me. "I am so incredibly sorry I left you alone with them," she whispered into my ear, her tears finally falling, soaking into the fabric of my shirt. "I should have known they were capable of this. I should have protected you better." "You came home?" I whispered back, resting my cheek against her hair, breathing in the scent of dust and her familiar shampoo. "That is all that matters. You came home, and you brought the storm." The FBI agents stormed the house a minute later. They handcuffed Richard, Martha, and Julian, reading them their Miranda rights and marching them out into the bright afternoon sun in front of all the neighbors. As they were being shoved into the back of the federal transport vans, Mrs. Higgins tried to sneak quickly back inside her house. I opened my door and called out to her from the porch. "Mrs. Higgins, I hope you took exceptionally good notes today. You can tell the rest of the HOA board exactly what happens to thieves who target sick children." She practically ran inside and slammed her door shut. The immediate nightmare was finally over. The poison had been completely extracted from our lives. But the long healing process, and the ultimate justice that awaited them in a court of law, was going to be the most satisfying chapter of all. I was ready for it. 6 months later, the chaotic dust had finally settled, and the entire landscape of our lives had completely and beautifully changed. Elena had formally requested a permanent stateside assignment. Given her impeccable, highly decorated service record and the severe, publicized trauma of our family situation, her military command, led by General Vance, quickly approved the transfer. She was now the commanding officer of an advanced training battalion at a secure base only 30 minutes from our home. After 8 months of terror, she came home to us every single night for dinner. The twins, Leo and Max, were absolutely thriving. Thanks to the immediate medical intervention, we were finally able to secure that fateful afternoon. Max's lungs had developed beautifully. They were crawling, babbling constantly, and destroying the living room with the kind of joyful, chaotic, unstoppable energy that only completely healthy toddlers possess. The shadow of their fragile start had lifted. But the real, permanent transformation happened under the fluorescent lights of the federal courtroom. The federal trial against my former in-laws was swift, legally brutal, and entirely merciless. Because they had crossed state lines with the fraudulently wired money and specifically targeted an active-duty military dependent, the federal prosecutors did not hold back an inch. It was a career-making case for them. During the intense discovery phase of the trial, my legal team dropped the final, devastating bombshell that nobody saw coming. My proprietary AI assistant, Sarah, the software that monitors all communication traffic on our highly encrypted home network for security purposes, had perfectly archived the phone call I received months ago from Elena's cousin, Claire. The very call where Claire played the sweet peacemaker and tried to manipulate me into signing over the deed to our house. But I didn't stop there. I had instructed my private investigators to relentlessly dig into Claire's digital footprint. We discovered a long, hidden trail of encrypted emails and burner phone texts between Claire and Richard. Claire was not just an innocent bystander trying to calm the waters. She was the absolute mastermind of the entire operation. She had used her intimate knowledge of our family dynamics to convince Richard that I was secretly hoarding Elena's military salary. Claire had orchestrated the intricate plan to freeze the accounts and steal the medical fund, aggressively demanding a 40% cut of the stolen cash to save her own failing retail business from impending bankruptcy. When my brilliant lawyer, Harrison, played the crisp audio recordings and explicitly displayed the damning emails on the massive presentation screens in the federal courtroom, the entire gallery gasped in shock. Claire, who had been sitting comfortably in the audience row pretending to be a supportive, grieving family member, turned a sickly shade of pale green. She was swiftly arrested by armed federal marshals in the hallway right outside the courtroom during a 15-minute recess. She was formally charged with federal conspiracy to commit wire fraud, extortion, and witness tampering. Her failing business was immediately seized by the government, and she was suddenly looking at a minimum of 5 grueling years in a federal penitentiary. The look of absolute betrayal on Richard's face when he realized his own niece had manipulated him was almost poetic. The dominoes continued to fall with satisfying speed. David, the corrupt, arrogant bank manager, did not even make it to the trial phase. To avoid a lengthy federal prison sentence, he cowered out and accepted a harsh plea deal. He turned over every single piece of financial evidence against Richard, providing the prosecutors with a perfect roadmap of the theft. David was publicly stripped of his banking license, hit with a massive 6-figure fine that wiped out his savings, and sentenced to 3 years of strict house arrest. His lucrative career and his standing in the community were completely annihilated. As for the main villains of this story, the federal judge showed absolutely zero leniency. Richard was found unequivocally guilty on multiple serious felony counts. Because all of his assets had been frozen and subsequently seized by the government to pay back the stolen funds with massive punitive penalties, he could not afford his high-priced, shark defense attorneys. He was forced to use a public defender. He lost all his commercial real estate properties to rapid foreclosure. He lost the prestigious country club membership he valued far more than his own daughter's love. He was sentenced to 8 hard years in federal prison. Martha, who sobbed hysterically and dramatically through the entire sentencing hearing, was found guilty as a knowing accessory to the crimes. She narrowly avoided prison time but was given 5 years of intense, highly monitored probation and ordered to perform 2,000 grueling hours of community service. Without Richard's money or influence to shield her, she was forced to pack up and move out of her massive suburban estate and into a tiny, run-down 1-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. The high-society friends she had spent her entire adult life trying to impress completely abandoned her overnight. She was a social pariah. And Julian, the precious golden boy. Julian was convicted of grand larceny, receiving stolen property, and physical assault. The judge was particularly disgusted by the verified fact that he had knowingly used funds meant to keep sick infants breathing just to buy a luxury sports car to show off to his friends. Julian was sentenced to 4 years in a medium-security facility. The last time I ever saw him, he was wearing an oversized, scratchy orange jumpsuit, his expensive designer haircut completely gone, looking utterly terrified as the stern bailiffs led him away in heavy chains. They had lost absolutely everything. Their money, their freedom, their elevated social status, and most importantly, they had lost their family forever. Elena and I did not celebrate their destruction with champagne or parties. We simply closed the dark chapter. We walked out of the heavy doors of the federal courthouse hand in hand, stepping out into the bright, crisp autumn air. We got into my car. Not a flashy sports car, but a safe, reliable, comfortable family SUV, and drove home to our children. We had completely excised the toxic cancer from our lives. We had protected our boundaries with an unbreakable wall of iron and law. Now, it was finally time to focus entirely on the future we deserved. It was a perfect, golden Sunday afternoon in late September. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of fallen leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. We were hosting a massive, joyful barbecue in the sprawling backyard of our brand new home. We had sold the old house weeks ago. There were simply far too many toxic, haunting memories tied to that entryway, to that living room wall where my head had hit the drywall, and moved to a beautiful, highly secured gated property with acres of green land where the boys could run free safely. The massive backyard was filled with loud, genuine laughter. Sergeant Miller and Corporal Jenkins, who had become like brothers to us, were manning the massive stainless steel grill, expertly flipping burgers and arguing good-naturedly about fantasy football scores. Mr. Sterling, who had surprisingly become a close family friend, was sitting casually on the expensive patio furniture, bouncing a giggling, energetic Leo on his knee while simultaneously discussing a revolutionary new cybersecurity initiative with me. Elena was standing near the vibrant flower garden, holding Max, laughing brightly at a terrible dad joke Miller had just told. She looked absolutely radiant. The heavy, dark shadows that had haunted her eyes during the grueling months of the trial were completely gone. She was finally at peace. I stood by the edge of the stone patio, holding a cold, sweating bottle of beer, simply watching the beautiful scene unfold in front of me. This was my family, not the people bound to us by a random, meaningless accident of genetics. Blood does not automatically make a family. Blood is just biology. Family is defined by unwavering loyalty. Family is defined by the people who stand fiercely in front of you when the wolves are scratching at the door. Family is the people who will fly across the world, kick down a heavy oak door, and wage an absolute war to protect you when you cannot protect yourself. I had spent years of my life keeping my head down. I had foolishly believed that being the bigger person meant silently absorbing the abuse, staying quiet, and sacrificing my own dignity just to keep a toxic, fragile peace. I had let Richard, Martha, and Julian walk all over me because I was deeply afraid of the inevitable conflict. I was afraid of ruining Thanksgiving dinners. I was afraid of making waves and upsetting my wife. I realize now, with crystal clarity, that keeping the peace with toxic people is just a slow, painful form of emotional suicide. You cannot ever negotiate with emotional terrorists. You cannot love a raging narcissist into respecting you. When people show you exactly who they are, when they show you that they value a luxury car over a helpless child's life, when they show you that they view your hard work as their personal inheritance to plunder, you must believe them the very first time. Through this nightmare, I learned how to set unbreakable boundaries. I learned that true strength isn't about how much pain you can silently endure in the shadows. True strength is having the absolute, unflinching courage to draw a hard line in the sand and say, "No more." It is having the courage to ruthlessly protect your inner peace, your vulnerable children, and your spouse, even if it means completely cutting off the people who share your last name. As the sun began to slowly set, casting a warm, beautiful golden glow over the green yard, Elena walked over to me. Max was sound asleep on her shoulder, his little chest rising and falling in a steady, incredibly healthy rhythm. She leaned her head against my side, and I wrapped my arms securely around her waist, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about so intently?" she asked softly, looking up at me with those eyes I loved so much. "I'm just thinking about how incredibly lucky I am," I said, leaning down and kissing the top of her head. "I have absolutely everything I ever wanted right here in this yard." She smiled, a deep, genuine, soul-healing smile. "We built this life, Arthur. We survived the fire they started, and we built something beautiful from the ashes." "We did," I agreed, clinking my bottle gently against her glass. "And absolutely nobody is ever going to take it away from us again." To anyone watching this video right now who is sitting in the dark, suffocating under the crushing weight of a toxic family, to the husbands who are mocked for their choices, to the wives who are constantly undermined, to the parents who are endlessly judged and manipulated by the very people who should be supporting them unconditionally, hear my voice clearly. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. You have the absolute, undeniable right to walk away. You have the right to legally, financially, and emotionally protect your children, your hard-earned assets, and your sanity. You have the right to build a brand new table and only invite the people who actually respect and love you to sit at it. It will be terrifying. It will be painful. The guilt trips will be vicious and relentless. But on the other side of that fear is a peace so profound, so deeply beautiful, you will wonder why you didn't leave years earlier. Do not wait for them to magically change. They won't. Take your power back today. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line in the sand and walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace and your children? Share your raw story in the comments section below. I read every single one of them, and your brave stories remind all of us that we are not fighting these difficult battles alone in the dark. And please, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey we take together. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with me today. Stay strong, aggressively protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.